So I am a pretty comfortable presenter. If you've got questions and you either want to unmute yourself or put yourself in the chat, whatever is fine. Ida's going to help me monitor the chat. But we're going to talk a little bit more about House of Ruth and our Gateway Project model for the next hour or so. But feel free to interrupt. But just to kind of give you some background, again, we are part of a comprehensive service agency at House of Ruth Maryland, which was established in 1977. We're a pretty big organization. We have an 84-bed emergency shelter, transitional housing apartments, and our Safe Homes program, which is a rapid rehousing program. We have a legal clinic, counseling for survivors, for children, and also family therapy. And all that's accessible through our 24-hour hotline. And then we have our intervention program, which is the Gateway Project, and our training institute actually is the other piece of what I do there. All of our services are available to people regardless of their gender identity, their gender expression, or their sexual orientation. And all of our programming is offered in English as well as Spanish, and most other programming can be offered in using the other languages using the language line. But just to kind of put it in context, in 2019, House of Ruth Maryland served over 8,000 survivors. That's 20 unique individuals every single day, and over 5,000 friends and family members on top of that. Our hotline took over 7,500 calls from unduplicated callers. Over 30% of those folks were requesting safe shelter. And even though we have a very large emergency shelter compared to others, 84 beds, we still have to turn away 2 out of every 3 requests for emergency shelter because we're already at legal capacity. And so what this tells us is that we're not going to shelter our way out of this. House of Ruth Maryland knew very early on that if we were going to meet our mission of ending intimate partner violence, that we really needed to be engaging the partners who were being abusive. And so in 1979, we had what was called the Batterers Group. It was created at the request of the survivors that we serve. And I think that that's an important thing. If you're looking at Duluth, our DAIP, Emerge, us, Men Stopping Violence, all of the best known programs really were created at the request of survivors themselves or their advocates. And so one of my soapbox items is that, we are a victim service just as much as a shelter. What we're doing is really focused on survivor safety. And so when we say we're a victim service agency, it makes sense that we would also have an intervention program. In 1983, we renamed it the Batterers Program and began accepting court referrals. Very creative. I know, it's what we did. But in 1987, we hosted the first National Batterers Intervention Program conference, and actually Ellen Pence from DAIP was our keynote speaker. We had Gus Kaufman from Men Stopping Violence. David Adams was actually at the conference. If you're interested in hearing it, I have those tapes you see on the lower right-hand corner. They are in my office still. It was the cutting edge technology of the time. So I keep saying I need to get them digitized and share with the field, but we do still have those tapes. But as I was saying earlier, in 1998, we were really misusing a bootleg version of the DAIP curriculum. None of the staff that was on the team in 1998 had been trained to use it. And they definitely were not using it as the way that it's intended. I know Scott quite well now, and I know that shame and coercion are not parts of the program. But like many programs in the 90s, our intervention program was very shame-based. We would have it wasn't uncommon to have over 30 people assigned to our group, and we had about a 55% attendance rate. We were charging folks a fee for unexcused absences when we were actually providing no service. Which meant we had participants who had mounting unpaid arrearages that were preventing them from being able to successfully complete probation. Our counselors, which is what our staff were called then, did the vast amount of talking. It was not uncommon for people to be able to sit in that room and not say a word over the course of 90 minutes and be able to kind of hide in that space. And shame and fear really were common tactics. I consider myself very, very grateful because in 2002, the man all the way to the left at the top, John Miller, was my colleague. At then the Batterers Program, and the gentleman underneath him, Dr. Oliver Williams, kind of tapped me on the shoulder, called me into the field and said, hey, young white lady, if you're going to lead a program with predominantly Black men in Baltimore City, I want to help you do it. And so Dr. Oliver Williams, I just owe my entire career to. He has been my professional mentor, a personal friend, and introduced me to a lot of people that you see here on this screen that many of you know and love. But these folks are really important to my career. Some of them are local champions and some of them are national. Some of the local Baltimore community service champions, and some of them are national champions throughout the field. I'm sure some of you all of you probably recognize 1 or 2 of them. And I'm just really grateful that these people of color in particular helped me, shared their knowledge, were incredibly kind, and trusted me with what is now the Gateway Project. And part of what we were building is we were thinking about how does culture impact how victims and survivors experience intimate partner violence. This was something we were talking about in the late 90s, early 2000s, and understanding that their culture impacted how they described what was happening to them, whether or not they felt they needed help, whether they felt worthy of help, whether they would reach out for help, and who they would reach out to, which, if any, services they would use, and how they would engage with other people. And so we were just kind of flipping that concept to be thinking the same thing about abusive partners. How do they describe what is happening to them, and how is that related to their culture? How does their culture impact whether they feel like they need help, whether they feel worthy of help, whether they will reach out for help, who they would reach out to, who they would reach out to, which services they would use, and how they engaged with others. And so we did this activity that I now some have done with some of you. I think I do now kind of around the country, where we teach other people to really look at what do you actually believe about the community that you're embedded in, the people that you serve, why people cause harm, and why people change. And we do this activity every few years now, where we develop our beliefs, and then we assess based on those beliefs, is our program in compliance with what we believe? Because that's really what we were struggling with. We weren't able to find a curriculum that was aligned with what we believe about the people that we serve. So as I was saying, we believe abusive partners are all capable of escalating their violence, and some to lethal levels. They're capable of changing and becoming non-abusive. They're likely to have been witnesses of trauma or oppressive systems. And I want to be clear, these are talking about the people that we were serving in Baltimore City, Maryland. Victims and survivors of intimate partner violence are changed or impacted by the abuse they experience. They're never to blame for their abusive partner's violence. They're also likely to have been witnesses of trauma or oppressive systems. Abusive partners abuse because there's a lack of individual and social consequences. It's what they have witnessed, what they have learned, and what has been reinforced over and over again. They are operating from insecure fear. This is an interesting belief that we go round and round about it every time we revisit this, that this idea that if you assume, sometimes we assume that abusive partners, when they're being aggressive, that they're operating out of a desire to power and control, to have power and control, or a desire to cause harm. And what we have kind of borrowed from a program called Man Alive, a gentleman named Hamish Sinclair in our field, that talks about that when they escalate to violence, it's actually because they're feeling insecure about what they have, their power, their male identity. But it's that if we assume they're operating out of fear, you're going to approach somebody very, very differently than if you assume they're operating out of power and control or manipulation. And so that's a really important one for us and how we operate within the program. They abuse because power feels good and healthier alternatives can be unfamiliar. And people change when they have the knowledge, the tools, and role model, and the benefits outweigh the costs, and when they can communicate an environment where they feel safe and not shamed. And these beliefs really guide everything. In your materials, you'll see I have provided a sample of our curriculum that includes the entire table of contents, but it also includes these beliefs. But not only that, there's pages and pages of guidelines that we say, okay, so if we believe these things, how should our agency be engaging with the community? What should be in our curriculum? What should our staff be required to be trained in? What do we expect of every staff person? How do we what do we know? What do we believe? How do we engage with our participants? How do we engage with survivors? But it informs every element of what we do. So our program, the Gateway Project, this curriculum that I'm talking about right now, is really written for men who have used violence against, and really a female intimate partner. This is not for men in same gender relationships. We believe that that's different motivation, different dynamics. It's intended for disinvested groups or communities because it has this intersectional lens. And so this is the hallmark of what we do. This is not just about, say, acknowledging that, Johnny might feel like he was framed by the police. This is recognizing that Johnny lives in a community where police have not been trustworthy for years. And he lives in a community that is fearful of traditional systems, and he doesn't see them as a resource, and his family doesn't see them as a resource. And what does it mean to have experienced intentional disinvestment and oppression, and using that as a learning tool? So how can we him tap into those feelings of anger and powerlessness and resentment, and use them as a tool to develop empathy for his victim and his children? Again, it's accessible for a low literacy population. And I told you a bit about our history about running an intervention program and why we felt compelled to write a curriculum. There are pieces of a curricula, and I think sometimes people put us in competitive positions, and I don't want to do that. There are pieces, I think the DAIP curriculum is brilliant for Duluth, Minnesota. But there are pieces that we've borrowed generously and credited appropriately. But we really just we felt compelled to write a curriculum, particularly because of the literacy issues. I feel very well aligned with Men Stopping Violence concept, but there's no way I'm going to get my groups to write essays and to write letters to the judge. I love the Family Peace Initiative. I love the concept of the river of cruelty, and we actually use, with their permission, pieces of that in our own curriculum. However, they're not going to be able to fill out these journals that they do in the Family Peace Initiative. It's just the structure of the curriculum didn't work for us. Lots of times I find myself philosophically aligned with a lot of my peers. And then, there's just so many people who have influenced our curriculum. David Garvin, who you've met here today, obviously the folks I was on the panel with today, Oliver, who I've talked about, and we name all of them quite generously. But when I'm talking about—
question, Lisa, sorry.
Yes, no, don't be sorry.
What literacy level is your Spanish language program geared to?
So we are currently working on the Spanish version of the curriculum right now, and I'm actually going to get into the literacy level right now. So for our English speaking curriculum, I'm glad you made a distinction between English and Spanish, because for our English speaking curriculum, our average reading level in America, not Baltimore City, is between 7th and 8th grade. So they call that, kind of on the way that we assess reading in this country, that's kind of between levels 2 and 3. But half of adults cannot read a book written at an 8th grade reading level. And 1 in 5 Americans read at a 5th grade reading level or below, which they consider level 1. Below a 5th grade reading level is actually considered functionally illiterate. And people who are 65 and over, people who are, and I'm using the language from the Center for Plain Language, who are, quote, inner city minorities, I don't love that language. Actually, it's almost 2 out of 5 folks. That number is even higher if English is your second language. So everything in our curriculum is written at a 5th grade reading level or below. Our Spanish speaking curriculum, which we haven't published yet, but I'm glad you asked about it, because we didn't want to just, we have literally translated the curriculum to Spanish, but we're now in the process of, and we're about on year 3 of the process of translating it culturally, right? Making sure that the examples that we're using are more culturally relevant, making sure, recognizing that. So for our English speaking population in Baltimore City, again, we write for our community, and if it helps yours, I hope it does. But in Baltimore City, substance abuse, heroin is the big issue for our English speaking population, looking at heroin and cocaine. When we're talking about our Spanish speaking population in Southeast Baltimore, mostly first generation immigrant folks, we're really talking about alcoholism. Our English speaking population is more likely to threaten with a gun. Our Spanish speaking population is more likely to use a knife or a machete, right? So those are the kinds of cultural differences, and bringing faith more into our Spanish speaking, because more of our Spanish speakers identify as Christian. We're not finished with that yet, but we are, and this is nearly impossible. We are aiming for 3rd grade reading level, but actually trying to eliminate any type of reading or writing. We have limited reading and writing in our English speaking population, but we're really trying to eliminate reading and writing in our Spanish speaking population, because we found that a lot of the men who immigrated really are not literate, not just in English, but also not in their first language, their language of origin. They kind of didn't get through a traditional education. Yeah, so I see it now, Derek, you're saying my Spanish language clients average 4th grade education from Central America. Yeah, we have a lot of folks, or the dialects are so different, right? And when you're talking about Spanish. So it's been really, it's been really interesting. We used to use a curriculum in our Spanish speaking group called CISAVIM, and then we used the Sync-based curriculum for a while, but both of them we've abandoned because of the dependence on reading and writing. Yeah, purely oral program, exactly right. That's exactly what we're seeing in Baltimore, Derek, thank you. So we're aiming for the 5th grade reading level. I've told you a bit about the service audience that we're serving. So we've got 59% unemployment, 41% don't have high school diploma or GED, 75% are single, 44% between the ages of 18 and 29, 84% identify as Black or African American, 85% are fathers. So based on what we know about literacy, right, we know that our population we really are probably looking at that level 1 literacy rate, and that's how we try to write. Also, any document that is handed anybody in our program is read out loud. It's not an option. We don't ask people if they'd like to have it read. particularly anything that they sign, and they also get a copy of anything that they sign in case they want to take it home and consult with somebody else if they're unable to read the document and maybe don't trust what we read, frankly. There's a lot of system mistrust in our community, and so we hold ourselves as accountable as we ask our participants to hold themselves, and we're really trying to model that accountability. We had the great pleasure of having Tony Porter and his team from A Call to Men come not too long ago and do a session with our participants, and they came with this tremendously long release of information about basically saying, like, you will not be paid for this, and we get to use your likeness if you agree to it. And I think they're
hand raised.
What's that?
Oh, we have a hand raised, Miss
Yes,
Pat.
hang on, Pat. I'm going to get to you in just a second. I want to tell you the story about Tony and his team. But so they had this really long release form that I said to him, well, you have to read it to the group. And I thought her eyes were going to pop out of her head, and it was all this legal jargon. And so we kept making her pause and reinterpret it because we wanted them to know that, you know, their safety was important to us, their confidentiality was important to us, and really, again, holding ourselves accountable, which is so important. Pat, did you have a question?
You know, I wanted to wait, Lisa, towards the end, but I felt that maybe we will go through the presentation and I wouldn't have a chance. I want to commend you for emphasizing the importance of what curriculum works for you, even if you inherit it. And, you know, I've been teaching in New Mexico for now going on 12 years, and northern part of New Mexico is very different from southern part of New Mexico. And so sometimes I think the biggest myth, and I'm so happy to hear it because now I know I'm not crazy and I'm not the only one, but if we don't stand up and say, you know what, I've inherited, I worked in California, Texas, and New Mexico. In every single program that I worked, there were inherited programs that we adopted or were given to. And one of the things, like you said, which is another thing I want to commend you, a lot of the staff was not really trained to do the Duluth model. And once we get trained, we come back and we understand it. But I think it's this transparency that I want to congratulate you on. I want to commend you, because if we don't stop and look at our community and see who we're teaching, something as important, you know, I think Mr. Derek, if that was his name, the literacy, the understanding, then we're not being effective because you just got bodies there and you're presenting, oh yeah, they did a curriculum, oh, they didn't come, but they're not capturing, then we're not doing anything. So kudos to that. I'm glad that I'm hearing that. I'm also glad to hear that people are saying, you know what, maybe we need to stop and look back and incorporate more cultural and stop looking and saying, maybe this hasn't worked now, maybe things are changing. So I think for all programs, we really need to be transparent, honest, and recognize that maybe we started wrong. You know, I did the same with the last program I was working. I had to put a stop. And one of the things I incorporated because of the data and survey information I was getting from participants was the importance of parenting. So kudos to that. And I'm going to shut down because then I'll talk forever. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the kind words, Pat. But you kind of reminded me, there's another presentation, David wanted me to come here and share about our curriculum. But what I keep telling people, I think what's most important that we share and I present on in other forums is just the process we went through. How did we engage our community? How do we involve our community? How do we listen to our community? What were the ways that we got feedback and all the forums we used and all that kind of stuff? Because for me, that's the most important piece, right? The activities are great, but it's really about kind of knowing who we're serving that has been so important to us. But I can tell you, people were not happy. And I want to be clear, this is not Scott and his team from DAIP, but it's it's like they always say, it's not the people, it's their allies, right? It's the people who believe in DAIP. I mean, could spit on me in some conferences and say, well, I was using it wrong, or I wasn't implementing it correctly. And if I had, maybe implemented it better, it would have worked in my community. And as I've learned more and researched more about low literacy, about trauma-informed care and all that stuff, I continuously have had colleagues that are reinforcing and helpful. But yeah, I agree with you, Pat. People really can be discouraging. And I'm also lucky to live in a state that doesn't mandate which curriculum I need to use. Every once in a while, there's a really gung-ho advocate that shows up to one of our community meetings saying that our standards need to be higher and we need to say you got to use these curricula. And I'm really fortunate that Maryland is not one of those states that do that. People were not very kind, unfortunately, but luckily Scott's always been kind. But I want to show you kind of what this looks like and why this was important. So there's this concept called the black butterfly in Baltimore City and the white L. And what this was created by Dr. Lawrence Brown at Morgan State University. If you live in a highly, highly segregated community, I would encourage you to read his book, which I've cited down down below, The Black Butterfly, The Harmful Politics of Race and Space in America, where he talks about there being 6 hyper-segregated communities in America, and Baltimore City being one of them. So this first map that I'm showing you is the map of where Black individuals live in Baltimore City. So you can kind of see how it blossoms out east and west. That's what we call the Black Butterfly. And then if you look at, this is our unemployment map. Right. So we're talking about sort of where is their investment, where is their opportunity, where are their resources available. So then this map is where we invest our tax dollars in Baltimore City, public tax dollars that go to public construction. You can see what we call the white L. It runs north and south. And if you've ever been to Baltimore, it's right here along the harbor, our nice tourist areas, in which Harbor East and Fells Point and downtown, right? That's what we call the white L. And that's where those resources are. This is where, this is really interesting. So this is not only where they put bikes, that for a bike sharing program and bike lanes in Baltimore City, this is where they surveyed people to see if they could use bikes, right? Like, how absurd. You see the L again, right? It's like this pattern of where do we concentrate our resources and our efforts that contribute to this hyper-segregation, and just a continuation of programming like redlining and segregation and disinvestment across in some of our communities. And this is the worst offender. I think this is the most visual one that you can see that L again. This is what we call zip cars. If you don't have zip cars in your community, zip cars are cars that you can rent by the hour if you don't own a car. So where did we decide to put cars that you could rent by the hour? We put it in communities of the highest income, with the most white folks, with the most resources, right? We're just like sort of layering resources and resources and resources on top of this white L over and over and over again, and continuing to neglect these disinvested communities. The participants I serve, they're coming from the butterfly. That's where they are. They're in the butterfly. This is where I live, by the way. This is my house. Right here on this map. But you know, this is this, and so I've grown up with and seen this, that you can walk in one neighborhood that changes drastically in Baltimore City. We have tremendous wealth in that L area that is witnessed by tremendous poverty. And you know, I would argue that's where a lot of our community violence comes from, is just the resentment of having such extreme poverty and disinvestment, having to live next door to such incredible privilege, is really problematic. If we don't invite that conversation into the group room, we're going to be irrelevant. And particularly me as a melanin deficient person, you know, that if I'm not able to speak to that, I'm certainly not going to have any credibility in our group room. So we have themes. Every single piece of our curriculum includes 4 different themes. We keep a focus on respect versus oppression. So if you're not being respectful, you're being oppressive. We talk about respect and disrespect are major topics in our community, and how that relates to male privilege and how people can define respect differently. We talk about respect and demanding respect as a survival instinct. And then we talk about victimization as their victimization, our participants' experience of victimization and oppressive systems as a tool to develop empathy and engagement into the program. We talk about parenting because we have so many parents in our group. We talk about parenting in every single session, where we talk about recognizing and stopping the generational cycle of abuse. This is a wonderful motivator for those of you who are working with parents. So many of our participants don't care if they're bad partners, but they want to be thought of as good fathers. And so parenting is a great inroad for us, as I'm sure many of you can relate to that. Again, recognizing their trauma histories and providing a sense of hope. Right. So going around telling everybody they're traumatized isn't helpful. Right. But talking about their ability to heal. We talk about brain functioning, and at a 5th grade reading level, if you can imagine. Right. And not only what happens to your brain that you're traumatized, but that your brain is brilliant, that you're walking around with trauma. And I don't love the name PTSD. None of us do. Right. It's not post-traumatic for some of our folks. It's current trauma, and it's not a disorder. Your body and your brain is doing exactly what it was supposed to do to protect you. And not only is your brain and your body functioning just as it's supposed to, but it is able to heal and return back to normal. And I have seen grown men crying in our group room when you talk to them about there is nothing broken about you. Given your life experiences, your brain and your body has responded exactly the way it's designed to, and it's brilliantly designed. And now let's work on the healing process. And it's just incredibly powerful. And we also talk about that in terms of their children. We talk about ACE scores and how they can help their children heal and how they can engage their children in therapy. And it's just a really powerful piece of the curriculum. And we talk about sexual abuse in every single piece of our curriculum. We think that's something that's not mentioned enough. If they are abusive in the living room and in the dining room and in the kitchen, you better believe they're abusive in the bedroom. And so we speak to our participants that if you have been physically violent towards your partner, or even chronically coercively controlling, it is impossible that you are having a healthy sexual relationship. Just by definition, your sexual relationship is coercive. And so talking about what is it like to have good, enthusiastic sex that everybody is engaged in is certainly a topic that we talk about a lot. And then also talking about women's safety in America, and particularly Black women's safety. And then we talk about the community and the need for the work to go beyond the group room. So many, and this is something that we've certainly borrowed from our colleagues at Men Stopping Violence, and you, Lester Douglas, champions a lot. So many of our folks are living in these isolated worlds where they depend on their partner to be their whole world, their whole communication system. They don't call people, they don't reach out, they don't ask for help. And so we're trying to create that community in the group room, but challenging them to take it outside of the group room. So for 90 minutes, we're singing this song about nonviolence, and then they're going out to these incredibly violent communities. We need to help them build that social network so they've got people who can reinforce their choice to become nonviolent. So our participants, that's who we wrote this for. I've talked a lot about them. I've talked to you about our beliefs and guidelines, and that guides really every piece of what we do in terms of the program process. We have check-ins at every group that we connect to the lesson. It's a closed-ended question, so it can happen quickly, but really it's so you can hear every single person's voice. If you hear it once, you're likely to hear it again in the session. That's why we all use check-ins. We require partner engagement. We ask for victim contact information at the front end of the program. But also we're a two-stage model. When they move from stage 1 to stage 2, we ask for that information again. And we literally say to them, hopefully you realize we're not as bad as you thought we were. And maybe we have something that we can offer, and would you be interested in sharing that information with us? Our curriculum includes a guide for prepping and debriefing every single session. I believe this is one of the most important things to do to make our program healthy. We run about 17 groups a week. And so I want to make sure that every facilitator, our co-facilitation teams are prepping for that group and debriefing, and they have a formula on how to do that. Our facilitators are modeling respect and empathy all the time. And showing a willingness to enter our participants' world without confrontation. And that's really hard. And that it was a big change for us. But showing up, if something's not making sense that your participant is saying, we engage those motivational interviewing tools and talk about showing up with authentic curiosity and a desire to understand. So we just keep asking questions instead of making accusations. We don't play gotcha. We're not trying to catch you in a lie. If something doesn't make sense, we'll ask genuinely authentic curiosity. Will show up with curiosity. We do try to co-facilitate in male-female teams, but as you all know, budgets are tight and it's not always possible. But whenever possible, we do. And we'll also hire people who have completed the program, who have remained violence-free for over 3 years. And I've told you a little bit about the values alignment work that we do. So let's talk about what the actual curriculum happens, the nuts and bolts. So stage 1 is what we call the what did I create in my relationship section of our curriculum. It is made up of 4 sessions. One is a pyramid exercise. If you're familiar with Duluth, it's a concept they talk about in the front in the introduction of their curriculum, but they don't have this exercise in their curriculum, where we talk about how most power structures are made up in a hierarchy, and that what does it mean to lead with compassion versus lead out of fear, and how do you get respect out of modeling versus respect out of fear, and how do you share power within a hierarchical system, and having them think about systems. And then that's really where we tap into what does it feel like to be on the bottom of that pyramid? What does it feel like when people are abusing that power? And would you, why on earth would you want to perpetuate that in your family system? We talk about labels for women and stereotypes, which is an exercise we get with permission from Men Stopping Violence, where we talk about, which is just a wonderful exercise, but I think it's particularly powerful with our population. We talk first about all the different labels, the negative labels we use to identify women, even when we're being nice, right? We refer to them as food and animals and all kinds of things. But the really powerful one that I enjoy doing is our stereotypes exercise, where we talk about what are the negative stereotypes you hear about women in our community. And of course, our groups are really good at this, right? They can kind of tell you everything terrible about women and how they're terrible drivers and they're liars and they're mistrustful and blah, blah, blah. And then we change, the label at the top and say, what if we said this was stereotypes about Black men? And if you were racist, if you were somebody who was really, really racist, would you believe these things? And it's just kind of a magical moment where they see that these stereotypes that racist people hold against them are almost identical to the negative stereotypes some of them hold about women, right? They can't drive, they're untrustworthy, they're lazy, blah, 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 right? All those kinds of things. And it's a powerful moment for them. We talk about how stereotypes really are used to hold for the privileged to hold on to their power. And so if you're walking, and then we relate to, what does it mean? What are the ways that you see white people walking around the world? And I want to be very clear, we have white men in this group and we engage them in this program as allies as well, and make sure that we're pulling them in and talking about what are the ways that you see racism in the world. And if somebody's walking in the world believing racist things about people of color, what happens to their behavior? And they start looking for examples that affirm their beliefs, right? So then we challenge them. So what does it mean if you're walking around the world believing these things about women? That when you see somebody who says, oh, I got these boots on sale, right? Instead of thinking thrifty and patient, you're going to think gold digger, wasteful, right? And so how are you looking for examples that affirm your stereotypes about women? That's just a really powerful exercise for that group. It's one of my favorites. We talk about the costs and benefits of using power and control, kind of bringing home that message that Emerge introduced, that this is not dysfunctional behavior. Lots of our participants like to say, I blacked out, I saw red, I just exploded, right? But really, how did you benefit from your use of violence? And recognizing that is actually a functional behavior that they're using to get what they want. And then the last one, of course, talking about the cycle of violence and sort of the honeymoon phase, the tension building phase, there being an explosion, and how our self-talk can talk us into that explosion or talk us down from that explosion. So when we talk about how the curriculum is actually written, there's a goal for each session so that we can assess, did we meet our goal? We do the focus on children and focus on sexual respect. There's handouts for everyone. We kind of list the handouts in it. There's a check-in question. There's discussion and activities. We're on the board a lot. Sometimes we do role plays with each other. We'll show videos. But what you'll see throughout our curriculum are these little icons where we have like facilitators notes, where we kind of do those facilitator tips and tricks that what might work with this group. We talk about sort of when you're on the board, and doing visual work is very, very important to reinforce things with a low literacy population. When are you having, we indicate when you're having a discussion, when there's handouts. But then what I really love is we have these sessions about, when some conversations are harder than others, and like people, groups have personalities. And so we have these sessions that say, if the group is struggling with this concept, here's where you might need to take it. Here's where you might want to reinforce the learning. Or if you've got a particularly stellar group that's really advanced, here's something, if they can, some folks can get through curriculum really fast, or they really get the concepts quickly. How can you challenge a more advanced group and take it a little bit, then work a little bit deeper? And then there's the facilitators tool chest, where we like to share our favorite group dynamic tips and tricks about sort of running the room, which is really fun. So stage one, really our goals is about identifying the abusive behaviors they've used, to better understand the impact their behavior has had on their partners and children, to identify how their pattern of behaviors have contributed to where they are right now, their current state of being, and identifying many different types of abusive behaviors, recognizing that it can be physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, and all that. So when the actual session, they come in, we take 5 minutes to do a check-in. They give their name, their victim name, and they have to name their children. First names only for confidentiality reason, but we like to bring the children into the room as well. The check-in is a relevant question with very brief answers. That's why we use a closed-ended question. We do a curriculum and discussion for about 30 minutes. And then we get into accountability sentences. And this is a concept we borrowed from David Garvin when he came to visit in Baltimore. They do these 5 sentences. Ideally, in a group session, everybody gets to try one. Spends about 2 or 3 minutes per sentence. And then once they get 5 sentences done, they get to petition. So petitioning is the first time you get to tell your story about why you're in this program. Because when they first come into week 1, they can't wait to tell their story. Then it's usually a train wreck of a story, right? Like week 1, it's I'm here because she lied on me and she's a jerk, and then and I didn't, I've got a rap sheet, and so I took a deal, and so I'm here, and this is bullshit, right? That's a pretty typical week 1 story, right? So once we do the accountability sentences, we're creating safety in the room. We're showing them that nobody's getting shamed whenever they acknowledge an abusive behavior. We're kind of creating a culture in the room. So what the sentences look like, and then I'll get into kind of the petitioning next. So the sentences is about taking responsibility for the violence that they've used. The sentence one of them has to be from their referring incident, their I statements. They incorporate their victim's name, and they're short and to the point. So a first type might be, I hit Sarah because she, was being a bitch, right? And he's judging, and he's not specific, or he's whatever. He's not specific about what he did. We would work with him to kind of workshop that sentence until he got to, I smashed Sarah's cell phone. It's very specific. It's an I statement. And then we ask him, what's the message that Sarah received based on your behavior? And this is how we're practicing flexing those empathy skills. And it's really incredible how many of our folks struggle with empathy and their feeling words. So we ask them to kind of come from their partner's point of view. and not the message you intended to send, but what was the potential impact? What was the message that your partner received? So a good example for this sentence might be, he doesn't respect me or my property. So a hallmark of our program is that every single staff person can do 5 sentences. And we want to make sure that we believe that everyone who has been in a long-term relationship, which we define as 6 months or more, can do 5 sentences quite easily. I always say I could probably do a sentence every weekend. And I'm in a very happy and healthy relationship. And we say that because we want to be very clear. We're not judging you. We're not labeling you. All we need you to do to get through stage 1 is to say, I can be a better partner and I've got things I can work on. That's the threshold. We don't need you to say much more than that. And so we all practice our own sentences. And so I'm going to ask you, if you reflect on your entire relationship history, I'd like to for you to think, could you do 3 sentences of 3 instances where you didn't handle a situation very well, when you could have been different, where you could have done better, when maybe you walked out on a partner during a heated argument, or you raised your voice and became intimidating, or maybe you called your partner out of their name. Have you cheated on a partner? Right? These are all abusive and coercive behaviors that our participants have all used. And so we're not necessarily normalizing abuse, but we want them to know that we're not labeling them for disclosing them. So I'd encourage you to try it and see if you can do it. I do ask the same of our judges, which is really important, because if they can't do sentences, they don't get through the program. They will be sent back to their judge. Because we believe with a minimum level of self-reflection, anybody can do this. And we work with them, we write the sentences for them, we really kind of massage it, but it's really, this is just we used to have a 1-stage program, and we spent all of our time focused on those new folks who were totally resistant and say, I don't belong here, I don't belong here, I don't belong here. The 2-stage framework allows us to set just a threshold that says, are you ready to do some work here? So if you can say, I've been abusive, I've used abusive behaviors, I'm willing to work on them, I can do better, you get to go to stage 2. Now, the move to stage 2 is they tell their story. And they have to tell folks, they're expected to read their 5 sentences and the messages that their partner got. So we're establishing that pattern of abuse. And then they tell their story, how he and the victim met, which behaviors he chose that caused tension in the relationship, because we use that the cycle of violence as a framework, and then which specific behaviors got him referred to the gateway. What was the big explosion? And then the group is allowed to then ask him questions. And they're usually asking questions about, is he being accountable? So is he minimizing, denying, or blaming his actions on his victim? Is he demonstrating empathy? Is he showing a willingness to work on himself? And then that group votes whether or not he's ready for stage 2. Now, if they vote no, they give him feedback about what he needs to work on, and he can try again the next week. If he is unable to meet the requirements after 2 tries, his case is closed. And I know that sounds really, really intense, but the truth is it rarely happens. What we're doing there is we're creating the peer requirement. We're saying to this group, you know what happens if he can't get through here a second time. So give him the feedback that he needs. Make sure you're coaching him, and we're setting up that mentoring relationship. Now, the truth is, stage 1 groups vote each other on all the time. Stage 1's like, yeah, he's ready. They're all minimizing, denying, and blaming, right? So they send him on to stage 2. Then he gets to stage 2 and he has to do it again. So again, this is about, they own the space. The group room is theirs, and they are responsible for the maturity of that space and what is happening there. So when somebody moves from stage 1 to stage 2, they go right in, they have to tell their story. The group members will ask them questions related to accountability and empathy, and then the group votes whether or not they're ready to be in stage 2. And this is where we have open enrollment. So you might have somebody on his 26th, 27th week looking at this guy trying to get into stage 2 and saying, I was just like you. And I hope you pay attention here because you got a lot to learn, right? Like, this is where the mentoring happens. And that's the magical piece. And tell our team, we know that our group members learn so much more from each other than they learn from us. And creating that male kind of camaraderie and mentorship framework is really, really important. If they don't make it into stage 2, they vote, they tell him he doesn't make it, they give him feedback, and they send him back to stage 1. And that's a nice, oh shit moment for the stage 1 group, right? When somebody they sent on gets sent back, they're like, oh man, what's going on up there in stage 2, right? And for some of our folks, they've never graduated from anything in their lives, right? So this is a big deal to move from stage 1 to stage 2. And again, they can try again the next week to get into stage 2. Again, rarely would it happen that somebody's case is closed for failure to get through twice, because that's when they start taking responsibility for each other. right? And coaching each other and helping each other tell their story in a way that doesn't minimize and deny, that teaches each other about empathy, and it kind of forces that relationship because nobody wants to see anybody's case closed. For stage 2, you got a 10-minute check-in, just like stage 1. We do 15 minutes on the new folks, we call them the petitions that are coming in. And then we spend most of the time really doing curriculum activities and discussion. This is where we get into the meat of skill building. This is where we're looking forward about what are we going to do instead of what we used to do. And we always like to save about 10 minutes for shout outs and goodbyes. Our groups leave a lot of praise, lots of praise, and lots of praise in front of each other. And so they shout each other out about who did a particularly great job that week. And if anybody's leaving the program, they get 5 minutes to say whatever they'd like to the group, which is usually really, really moving. But they say goodbye. And of course, we welcome back. Everybody is welcome back to the program. We are just recently, as of March of this year, have been able to make the program free because of the research that we've had. We've been able to apply for grants. And for the first time, our program is free. So we used to say you can come back free of charge as long as you're free of charges for the rest of your life. But now everybody gets to come back free. But we do encourage people to come back. We always say if you need a tune-up. And this year, we're now officially launching a mentoring program with graduates, helping people, kind of coaching them through the program, helping them with their sentences, doing some of our orientations and things like that. So stage 2, we're really focused on using accountability and empathy. We're building on our goals from stage 1. We're identifying motivation for their abusive behavior and offering alternatives. So the alternatives really are looking at healthy relationships. How do we define healthy relationships? We spend 11 sessions talking about how do you communicate about healthy relationships, what are your expectations in those relationships, and what's unhealthy in relationships. We spend 4 sessions on communication skills. While we don't believe that most people are abusive because of a communication deficit, some of our participants really do have one, and they need to learn how to be assertive. We spend 2 sessions talking about healthy and unhealthy, sexual respect and sexual abuse, even though the theme is woven throughout all of our curriculum, but 2 sessions are specifically about consent, coercion, and rape. 2 sessions about healthy and unhealthy masculinity, and 5 sessions on parenting, which is a real draw for our folks. So I want to kind of show you some examples of what this looks like. So our goal for our communication style session is to have participants become aware of the different communication styles and to be able to identify the characteristics and characteristics, goals, and outcomes of each type of communication style. So we talk about assertiveness, aggressiveness, passive aggressiveness, and passiveness. And we start introducing assertiveness, and then many of you have seen something like this, an assertiveness formula. So when you name the behavior you don't like, I feel, and you share an authentic feeling word, which can be really hard for the male population, particularly the highly traumatized male population, particularly the highly traumatized male population of color, because they've been told over and over again that their feelings don't matter, right? And so we do a whole section about identifying our feelings, but you share how you feel, and then in the future, I'd appreciate, and you make a reasonable request. So let me show you just a quick example of what that looks like.
So somebody give us a sentence.
Oh, excuse me, sorry.
Okay, let's go. Nice and loud for me. Let's go.
Okay. When you ignore me, I feel rejected. In the future, I will appreciate if we listen to each other to get a better understanding.
Right. So that's a great example of using assertiveness, and it's real easy when you're kind of just doing it on paper, but then we get into role plays with each other. Watching a video and relating it to your life doesn't necessarily work for a low literacy population, but we use real world examples of their own. And so let me show you, this is what a typical role play looks like in the Gateway Project.
Your partner Chiffon answers the phone, whispers into it for a few seconds, and then hangs up quickly as you walk into the room. So remember, you are going to be, actually let me give you the feeling sheet.
Okay. Come on.
So remember, you're going to be trying to be assertive, and Brandon or Chiffon's going to be doing whatever.
Okay.
So you're going to try to stay assertive.
And action.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, director.
How you doing, Chiffon?
What's up, babe?
Chilling, man. When you be on your phone and then you hurry up, I feel untrustworthy.
Oh, you good? I have to be talking to my friend.
I will appreciate it if.
What, you want to see my phone or something?
No, I don't have
I
to
know
see-
who I be
I
talking
don't have to see
to.
your phone. You have your own phone. We have our own phone. So I would appreciate it if we.
I'm
trying to figure out where all this coming from.
I'll be respect. Let's say, I appreciate, in the future, I'll appreciate it if we show more respect for each other when we're on the phone.
So what you saying? Like what you mean? What you want me to get on my phone?
You can get on your phone. We both can get on our phone. Just when we get on our phone, you don't have to be so secretive about every situation.
I don't be being secretive. I just don't be liking talking when you coming back. I don't want you all in my business.
It's that uncomfortable laugh, y'all. That's hitting. Don't worry. Come on, stay in there, Demetrius.
Okay.
Keep going it again.
Sometimes I feel some type of way because when I speak on what I'm talking about to my friends, you don't like it.
I don't feel no type of way when you talk to your friends. You can talk to whoever you want to. Please, I just think that we should have more respect for each other when we're on the phone.
All right, I hear you.
I feel like I could watch them do this forever. We do, just for the record, we do ask all of our participants for permission before we use. All of our groups are recorded for training purposes for our staff, but if we're going to use them externally, we get everybody's consent to share videos like this. But it's just really great to see the camaraderie that happens, and to see, some of these men, the idea of being in a group room with other men talking about healthy relationships is a once in a lifetime opportunity. And it's just amazing. It's magical when they start really supporting each other in a positive way. Pat, I see your question about grants, and that's a whole other presentation, but I will answer that before we leave here. But I know some folks are tight on time, so I'm not ignoring that question, but I'll come back to it. Another great example of a piece of curriculum that we use is one called Roots of Truth, where our goal is to become aware that everything happens to us, happens to a growing child, to become aware that everything that happens to a child growing up has the potential to have a tremendous impact on them as an adult. So this is a diagram that we use, and we talk about the messages that you were giving about manhood, and we write them all down here at the bottom, and we call it sort of the roots, and how those messages kind of come up. And in this area, in these blank spaces, we talk about what are the behaviors that resulted out of the messages you got about manhood. So if you were told men should always be tough, men should have lots of sex, men should be protectors, men should be chivalrous, and they're not all bad, right? They're not all bad messages that these folks have gotten. So then they put the behaviors. What are the behaviors that it resulted in? And when we look at how it impacted them, we talk about, okay, now the fruit that is bearing here is going to fall off this tree and create the next generation of trees, i.e. their children, right? We use this analogy of children. So when these fruits fall, what messages do you want to continue on? And which ones do you think you'd want to leave behind for the next generation? And sort of thinking about themselves as role models and responsible, having a responsibility within their community and to their children, and the idea that they have the power to stop these messages, that to reflect on what they've learned, what they've been told, and how they can change moving forward. This graph here, for those of you who love graphs, I do. This blue line here is our attendance in 2002 before we started redesigning the program. And you can see we were on a downward trend of 55%. When we started really aligning, and this was before we made any policy changes or any curriculum changes. This was just about how do we shift how we're treating the people who walk in, right? Instead of thinking that they're trying to dominate us, we assume that they're operating, that when they're aggressive, it's out of fear, right? It's under the batterers program, we might have said, where were you last week? I had to, you got 3 absences left. I had to tell your agent. Under the Gateway Project, we're saying, we really missed you. You're an important part of our group. Let's talk later about, how many absences you have left, but sort of this whole idea that you are welcome and we want you in this space and we are creating community. The red line, right where these 2 lines intersect actually is when we shut the program down around Christmas time every year and do development work. And this is where we did that beliefs exercise and really thought about who were we serving. And the red line is the trend line for the attendance after the fact. We now have and sustain about a 77% attendance rate, and they are allowed some absences. So we're not expecting 100%, and it is a court mandated population, resistant population. So we certainly don't expect 100%, but that's just a tremendous increase that we have seen. Like we said, we've had the program evaluated. We're proud to say that we reduced not just domestic violence, but all violence overall. We are working right now to have the program recognized by crimesolutions.gov as an evidence-based practice. We have a research team that we meet with every two weeks. We're now expanding it to invite in supportive services around employment, mental health, substance abuse, and parenting. Not that we provide it. We do not provide those services. Don't get it twisted. We're here to talk to them about his violence, but we're bringing those partners in because not just recognizing him as a whole person and his wellness contributing to the health of his family, but also for those of you who have the advocacy hat on, these are our lethality indicators, y'all. Unemployment, untreated mental illness, substance abuse doesn't cause abusive behavior, but an unemployed abusive partner is more lethal, right? A substance abusing abusive partner is more lethal. And so making sure that we're reducing lethality, improving our retention rates, and really kind of treating the whole person. In terms of our grants, we have city level grants, we have state level grants, and we have at times had federal level grants. We do not have a federal, well, we have one federal research grant right now from the National Institute of Justice, but it's at every different level. The bulk of our funding, public funding, comes from the state, absolutely, by far. We get very, very limited. Right now, we have no funding from the city for our intervention program, but we have some on the way. And I think, and then we have some of that national level funding to do evaluation. We also have some private corporate. Johns Hopkins University contributes, and we've got some businesses that we've some solicited. We've done some private donations and corporate. So with that, I guess I'll open for questions.
Thank you, Lisa. That's great information. So any comments or any other questions? Karen.
Hi. I'm so intrigued. I'm so intrigued, and I just want more and more and more and more. So I facilitate a program out of Chicago for the Cook County courts. And it's we're the only probation department that facilitates their own program, their in-house program. And I've been doing it for the last 22 years. And I feel like the demographics and everything that you've described very much mimics who we're serving as well. And so I would really be interested in trying to get a hold of the curriculum that you have created. And could you kind of tell us kind of how to go about doing that?
Absolutely. So if you go to our website, I'm putting it in the website in right now in the chat, www.hruth.org. You can go to our Training and Institute website, sign up for our Training Institute newsletter. The next round, we do our training as a virtual training. It's 4 days because we have a national audience. It's a 4-day virtual training that you'll end up with the curriculum at the end. It's about $300 a person for the full 4-day training, plus you'll get the curriculum at the end.
Okay.
And I am going to hear you. I need to plug my laptop in, but I can hear you. I'm going to step away. You can't see me, but I'm still listening for the next question. I just don't want my computer to die on you. What's the next question?
Derek had his hand up.
Okay, Derek.
I was wondering, I know like in Virginia, as part of our standards, we need to have visitors observe us. Do you have the same reciprocation in Maryland?
We are not required to have that. However, we do always open our group for observation. We do consider, we open our groups for observation, and we're pretty lucky in the facility that we have created. We built a new community center in 2018 where the cameras are in the ceiling. Like they don't even realize that they're being recorded or observed. But we also have an observation room. So for folks who may not be comfortable being in the room, that said, we always ask the group's permission for an observer. So we don't identify the person, but we'll say, this is a judge that wants to learn more, or somebody just took a training. And if by chance anybody in the group, every once in a while you get, somebody, particularly a curmudgeon who doesn't want an observer, in which case we have pre-recorded groups where we do have permission to use for training.
Because I would love the opportunity, just as, because you guys are like oral-based program like I am.
Yeah, come on.
I'd love to see the way you guys run it. We're the opposite. We're the second wealthiest county in the country. I'm in Fairfax.
Yeah.
And we have our pockets. We have our islands of poverty. To see you have the L.
Yeah, come on up. We'd love to have you observe. Absolutely, anytime. We're running 17 groups a week, so we can work around most people's schedule. Yeah.
Yeah. Only run 2 a week, but that's enough.
That's plenty. That's plenty for one person.
Especially virtually. Thank you.
Of course.
And then I think we have Ms. Pat's question pending as far as the grants covering participant cost. Are they private foundations, federal, or from your city, county, or state?
I think she already Pretty,
Sorry, I must have skipped it. Did we lose you, Lisa? Are you there? I think your video froze.
Hey guys, my name is Wendy Lee. I'm out here in Maryland with Lisa. I work very close with her. She just texted me. She said her laptop just died. She's sending her apologies and her email. I'm going to drop in the chat here in case anybody has any additional questions. But apparently we have lost Lisa. And I'm hoping that you guys will continue the conversation and ask her any questions by email, because this is what she does and she does this so well. If you guys can't get this, this is her passion. And I know she loves sharing, so she's kicking the door right now because she's very upset. that
She got her back kind of, I think
Wendy, I'm back, and thank you for saying nice things.
Thank you, Wendy.
Apparently the outlet I was in was not actually charging my computer, but I'm here. Thanks for
Good.
being a great sidekick, Wendy. I appreciate you always. I'm sorry, there was one more question, I thought. I want to honor time though too.
Any other questions? We've got 1 minute left.
Well, let me just thank you all so much. I know you guys have been learning so much and all the different models and approaches, so I appreciate you taking the time to learn about the Gateway Project. Come visit us, and thanks for your time and attention.